Get ready to witness the most humiliating 47 seconds ever captured inside Judge Judy's courtroom. This wasn't just a case, it was a moment of television history, one that left millions of viewers stunned, replaying the clip over and over again. Why? Because a woman named Karen thought she was clever enough to walk into Judy's courtroom and not only challenge her authority, but openly mock her Brooklyn accent. Yes, you heard that right. She mocked Judge Judy's voice to her face. The audience gasped, the cameras rolled, and Judy's eyes narrowed into that deadly stare viewers know all too well. What Karen didn't know was that she had just triggered the fastest courtroom meltdown ever seen on national television. In less than a single minute, exactly 47 seconds, her smirk would vanish. Her confidence would crumble, and she would be left sobbing in front of millions. Karen Mitchell was not just any litigant. She was the textbook definition of entitlement. Friends described her as the kind of person who demanded to see the manager if her latte foam wasn't perfect. Neighbors whispered about her constant complaints, her endless arguments over minor inconveniences, and her tendency to treat every disagreement as a full-scale legal battle. In her mind, the world was divided into two categories: people who served her and people who needed to be put in their place. When the opportunity to appear on Judge Judy's show came along, Karen saw it as her big chance. She wasn't there just to win a case over a handbag dispute. She was there to prove she was smarter, sharper, and tougher than the most famous judge on television. From the moment she walked into the courtroom, it was obvious that Karen had prepared for a performance, not a case. She strutted in as if the cameras were there just for her, her freshly styled hair glinting under the lights, her designer outfit carefully chosen to scream superiority. She clutched a leather portfolio filled with printouts from random websites, convinced these scraps of internet research made her more knowledgeable than someone who had presided over more than 20,000 cases. To her, Judge Judy wasn't a legendary figure with decades of experience. She was just another authority figure Karen believed she could bulldoze with arrogance. But here's the thing about Judge Judy. She doesn't just listen to your words, she studies your behavior. And from the very first eye roll Karen threw, Judy was already building her case. Every exaggerated sigh, every dismissive laugh, every side comment Karen muttered under her breath was fuel to a fire Judy was preparing to ignite. What Karen saw as confidence, the audience instantly recognized as disrespect. And Judy, she was waiting, patient as a predator, knowing the right moment would come to turn this entire performance into a demolition. The case itself seemed simple, at least on paper. Karen was suing her former friend over a supposedly ruined designer handbag worth around $1,000. But to Karen, this wasn't just about money. She had rehearsed this moment for weeks. She bragged to her friends that she had studied Judge Judy episodes, analyzed Judy's speech patterns, and even practiced mocking her Brooklyn accent in the mirror. Yes, that's how far she was willing to go. Karen thought the way Judy spoke was a weakness she could exploit, a way to belittle her in front of an audience and prove she was the smarter one. So when Judge Judy asked a simple, direct question, Karen couldn't resist. She leaned forward, a smirk curling across her lips, and in a voice dripping with mockery, exaggerated Judy's accent right back at her. "You know, Judge, it's like this." The audience froze. Gasps echoed around the room. For a split second, time seemed to stop. Judge Judy's face didn't flinch, but her eyes, they locked onto Karen with a gaze that could melt steel. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Karen's smug chuckle as she leaned back, convinced she had just scored a point. What Karen didn't realize was that she had just walked directly into the most dangerous trap of her life. Judge Judy does not take mockery lightly, and in just 47 seconds, Karen would go from mocking Judy's voice to crying like a child who had just been caught red-handed. This wasn't going to be a mild scolding. This was about to become the most viral courtroom takedown in history. Smash that like button. Right now, if you believe respect isn't optional in a courtroom, and if you think arrogance always gets what it deserves, make sure you're subscribed, because this story is only just beginning. Judge Judy didn't respond right away to Karen's mockery. That was her style, silence sharper than any insult. She leaned back in her chair, folded her hands, and let the weight of the moment sink in. The audience, stunned by Karen's brazen mimicry, shifted in their seats. You could feel the tension building like the air before a thunderstorm. Everyone in that courtroom knew something explosive was about to happen. Judy's reputation wasn't just built on rulings, it was built on moments exactly like this. She didn't just administer justice, she turned arrogance into a public lesson. For viewers at home, Judge Judy's Brooklyn accent wasn't a weakness. It was a badge of authenticity, a sound that carried decades of courtroom authority. But for Karen, it was a punchline, an opening she thought she could exploit to humiliate Judy. She had no idea that Judy had already read her paperwork and seen through her game. The judge's eyes had scanned the case file earlier and noticed the inconsistencies, the exaggerated damages, and the story that didn't quite line up. Judy had seen thousands of plaintiffs like Karen before, and every one of them had walked in with swagger, only to leave crushed by the reality of facts and law. Judy finally spoke, her tone deceptively calm. "Miss Mitchell," she said, her words cutting like glass, "this is a courtroom, not a comedy club. You will address me with respect." It wasn't loud or dramatic, but the controlled authority in her voice made the audience sit up straighter. Karen's smirk widened. She thought she had gotten under Judy's skin. "Well, Your Honor," Karen drawled, dragging the vowels, "I was just trying to keep things light." Another ripple of discomfort moved through the room. The audience knew this wasn't confidence. It was provocation. Karen had crossed an invisible line, and Judy was tightening the rope. To understand what came next, you have to appreciate who Judy is. This wasn't just any judge. By this point in her career, she had handled over 20,000 cases. She had dealt with scam artists, manipulators, habitual liars, and every type of entitled personality imaginable. She didn't just preside, she dissected people. With one glance at Karen, Judy had already sized her up. A woman who thought charm and mockery could overpower truth. Judy had spent decades dismantling exactly this type of arrogance, and she wasn't about to let Karen turn her courtroom into a stage for disrespect. Judy leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to that dangerously quiet tone longtime viewers recognized as the calm before the storm. "Did you just mock the way I speak? In my courtroom?" The words hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Karen blinked, then shrugged. "Well, if the shoe fits," she quipped, her voice rising just enough to remind everyone she thought she was still in control. The audience gasped audibly. Even the cameraman steadied his frame, knowing this was no longer just a handbag case. This was about to become the viral moment of the season. That one smug reply was the spark Judy needed. She had given Karen a chance to back down, to show humility, but Karen doubled down instead. Judy's eyes narrowed, her voice sharpened. "Let me explain something to you, Miss Mitchell. My accent does not change the law. My accent does not alter facts. But your arrogance, that changes everything." The courtroom went silent. Karen's face twitched as she realized Judy was shifting the ground beneath her feet. What she thought was a clever joke had just become the very thing that would destroy her credibility. But Judy wasn't finished. She had already spotted contradictions in Karen's paperwork, numbers that didn't add up, timelines that made no sense. While Karen had spent her energy preparing jokes and insults, Judy had been quietly preparing the kill shot. And now, she was ready to pull the trigger. Karen didn't know it yet, but she had just walked into a trap meticulously set by someone who had been humiliating arrogant litigants on national television for more than 2 decades. The audience leaned forward, hungry to see what would happen next. Judy straightened her papers, adjusted her glasses, and gave Karen one last look that said everything without words. You just made the worst mistake of your life. And so, the countdown began. 47 seconds. That's all it would take to turn a mocking smirk into a full-blown breakdown. In less than a minute, Karen's performance would collapse, her voice would crack, and her carefully constructed facade would disintegrate before the eyes of millions. She thought she had embarrassed Judy. Instead, Judy was about to make her the most unforgettable cautionary tale in courtroom history. Smash that like button right now if you think Judy's accent is a strength, not a weakness, and comment, "Respect the court if you believe arrogance should always be punished." Because what happens next will show you exactly how fast Judy can turn disrespect into devastation. The moment Judge Judy leaned forward, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted completely. Karen, who had strutted in as though the cameras existed to flatter her, suddenly looked smaller. Judy had allowed her the rope, and Karen had taken it loop by loop, tying it around her own neck. Now it was time for Judy to pull. "Mitchell," Judy began, her voice calm but lethal, "you seem to think this is a performance. Unfortunately for you, the only act being performed here is your own downfall." Her words sliced through the silence. Karen opened her mouth to protest, but Judy wasn't finished. "You mocked my accent. You laughed at the way I speak. But accents do not win or lose cases. Evidence does. And that's where your story collapses." Judy lifted the paperwork Karen had submitted. The audience could see the stack of documents wobbling slightly in her hand. "Let's start with your damages. You claim this designer handbag cost you $1,000, and yet, in your written statement, you value it at $800. Which is it, Miss Mitchell?" Karen stammered, caught off guard. "Well, I meant after taxes." Judy cut her off sharply. "After taxes? Handbags do not appreciate in value because you decide to make them more expensive in your imagination." "That is lie number 1, the audience murmured. Judy pressed forward. "And here's another. You claim the bag was destroyed at a dinner party on April 15th, but in your initial filing, you wrote April 20th. Which is it? Or do you simply change dates the way you change accents?" Karen flushed, her bravado fading. She tried to wave it off as a mistake, but Judy wasn't letting go. "Mistakes happen once. You've made 17. I counted them before you even opened your mouth today. 17 lies, contradictions, and exaggerations. And then, you thought mocking my voice would cover for your lack of truth." The room went still. This was the countdown. 47 seconds of pure demolition. Karen's smirk cracked first. Her lips tightened, eyes darting nervously. "Your Honor, that's not fair," she began. Judy struck again. "Fair? You dare talk about fairness after mocking the very court you begged to hear your case? The only thing unfair here is the time we've wasted listening to your arrogance." 15 seconds in, Karen's hands were trembling. She reached for her papers, trying to gather herself. Judy's voice only grew sharper. "You prepared jokes. I prepared facts. You rehearsed mockery. I reviewed the evidence. Which of us looks foolish now?" By 30 seconds, Karen's voice cracked. The confident drawl was gone, replaced by a panicked whine. "I was just being passionate," she cried. Judy's eyes narrowed. "Passionate? No, arrogant. You disrespected this courtroom, disrespected me, and in doing so, disrespected yourself. Passion fights for truth, arrogance laughs at it, and arrogance always loses." The audience was transfixed. Karen's perfectly styled hair was coming undone as she ran shaky hands through it. Her designer blazer looked less like power and more like a costume. Her once proud posture had crumbled into a slouch of desperation. At 47 seconds, the meltdown was complete. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over as her voice broke into sobs. "Please, Your Honor," she whimpered, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "I didn't mean any disrespect. I was nervous. I was trying to—" But Judy didn't allow excuses. She delivered the line that would echo across the internet. "You thought mocking my accent made you powerful. Now the only thing mocked is you." The courtroom erupted. Not in laughter, but in a stunned silence heavy with satisfaction. The countdown was over. Karen Mitchell, who had entered the room rehearsing jokes and insults, was now reduced to a sobbing figure, begging for mercy from the very judge she had dared to ridicule, and every second of it was immortalized on camera. Smash that like button if you believe Karen got exactly what she deserved in those 47 seconds. Comment "Justice served" if you think Judy's demolition was legendary. And stay tuned, because the verdict and Karen's ultimate humiliation were still to come. The 47 seconds had ended, but the echoes of Karen's meltdown still hung in the courtroom. She sat slumped at the plaintiff's table, her once proud posture reduced to trembling shoulders and tear-streaked cheeks. Judge Judy, unfazed by the display of desperation, adjusted her robe and spoke with a clarity that carried the weight of finality. "Miss Mitchell, let me make something very clear. You don't win cases with arrogance. You don't sway a court by mocking accents. In my courtroom, facts matter. Respect matters. And today, you showed neither." Karen sniffled, fumbling through her scattered paperwork, but Judy had no interest in watching her scramble. "You claimed damages of $1,000. You provided contradictory statements, false dates, and exaggerated numbers. And then you thought the smartest move was to insult this court. Let me save you any further embarrassment. Your claim is dismissed with prejudice." The words landed like a gavel strike. Final and devastating. Karen gasped as if she had just been struck. Her case wasn't just denied. It was demolished in the harshest terms possible. But Judy wasn't finished. She leaned in, her gaze sharp enough to pierce through Karen's last defenses. "And let me give you some free legal advice, Miss Mitchell. The next time you walk into any courtroom, remember this moment. Remember that. Mocking authority doesn't elevate you, it buries you, because what you just did today wasn't courage. It was self-destruction." Karen's sobs grew louder, but the verdict had been delivered. The audience in the courtroom remained silent, watching as the self-proclaimed know-it-all collapsed completely. This wasn't just a lost case, it was a televised downfall. Within hours, that downfall would belong not just to the courtroom, but to the entire internet. The aftermath was swift and merciless. When the episode aired, Karen's mocking imitation of Judy's accent and her subsequent breakdown spread like wildfire. Clips of her smirking, then sobbing within the same minute, racked up millions of views across social media platforms. TikTok users stitched her downfall with captions like "Arrogance has a price," while Twitter lit up with hashtags like "Respect the Court" and "accent of justice." Memes exploded, contrasting Karen's mocking tone with her tearful pleas. She had come into the courtroom hoping for validation, but had instead become the internet's newest cautionary tale. Her local community recognized her instantly. Neighbors who once tolerated her endless complaints now crossed the street to avoid being associated with her. Parents at her children's school whispered, some even sending links to the viral clip in group chats. Karen, once obsessed with asserting authority, found herself stripped of it entirely. She wasn't feared or respected anymore. She was mocked. Exactly the fate she had intended for Judge Judy. Meanwhile, Judy's reputation only grew stronger. Legal experts praised her handling of the case, calling it a masterclass in courtroom authority. Media outlets ran headlines like "Judge Judy destroys mocking plaintiff in 47 seconds" and "Respect isn't optional in Judy's court." For longtime fans, this was another reminder of why Judy remained America's toughest judge. She didn't just rule, she educated. Her lesson this time was simple. Never mistake kindness or authenticity for weakness. For Karen, the ripple effects were devastating. Job opportunities dried up once employers connected her name to the viral video. Online commenters flooded her social media accounts, forcing her to shut them down. Even her closest friends distanced themselves, unwilling to defend behavior that the whole world had seen. Karen had wanted 15 minutes of fame. She got it, but not in the way she dreamed. Instead of being celebrated, she was immortalized as the woman who mocked a judge and paid the price in under a minute. And yet, for viewers, the moral was clear. Arrogance always collapses. Respect always matters. In Judge Judy's courtroom, you cannot hide behind smirks or jokes. Judy herself closed the case with a line that echoed across millions of screens. Humility wins. Arrogance loses. That's not just law, it's life. So, if you're watching this and believe Judy delivered the justice Karen so desperately needed, smash that like button right now. Comment respect if you think authority should never be mocked. And don't forget to subscribe for more legendary moments where arrogance meets its reckoning. Because in Judge Judy's world, disrespect isn't just punished. The courtroom had seen its share of arrogance, but on this day, it was about to witness something so shocking that it would echo far beyond its wooden walls. The cameras were already rolling when a woman, whose sense of entitlement filled the space before she even opened her mouth, leaned forward with a sneer on her face and said the words that would seal her fate. "You're just a useless grandma." The audacity was like a slap in the face, not just to Judge Judy herself, but to every person in the room who understood exactly who they were in the presence of. This wasn't just an insult. It was a declaration of war in a place where arrogance had never won. The silence that followed wasn't ordinary. It was thick, electric, and suffocating. Audience members exchanged wide-eyed glances as if to confirm they had really heard what they thought they heard. The plaintiff sat frozen, unsure whether to laugh at the absurdity or shrink into her chair from second-hand embarrassment. Even the bailiff tilted his head slightly, bracing for impact, because everyone who had ever spent more than 10 minutes in Judge Judy's courtroom knew exactly what was coming next. You don't throw insults at Judy Schindlin and expect to walk away unscathed. Not today, not ever. What made this moment even more surreal was the confidence with which Karen, the entitled defendant, had delivered her words. She strutted into that courtroom as though it were her stage, as though the cameras were rolling for her personal victory show. In her mind, she was the star. But in reality, she had already written the script of her own downfall. Calling Judge Judy a useless grandma wasn't just disrespect, it was ignorance. And ignorance in that courtroom was about to be punished in front of millions. Judge Judy's face remained still, her lips pressed into a line, her eyes unblinking. But behind that silence was a storm gathering strength. Everyone watching could feel it. It wasn't a question of if Judy would respond. It was a question of how devastating the response would be. And that anticipation, that quiet before the thunder, was the moment that hooked an entire audience across America. Karen wasn't just any ordinary defendant. From the moment she walked into the courtroom, she carried herself with the swagger of someone convinced the world revolved around her. She wasn't nervous or humbled by the seriousness of the setting. Instead, she paraded down the aisle with a smug grin plastered on her face, her designer handbag swinging from her arm like a trophy. It was clear she didn't come to court seeking justice. She came to put on a performance. Her reputation preceded her. Neighbors whispered about her constant arguments at the grocery store, her loud rants in parking lots, and her endless demands to speak to the manager whenever she didn't get her way. She had made a habit of intimidating waitstaff, rolling her eyes at customer service employees, and acting as though her money entitled her to special treatment everywhere she went. To people who knew her, this behavior was typical. To those who didn't, it was shocking. But in Judge Judy's courtroom, arrogance wasn't just shocking, it was suicidal. The irony of Karen's arrogance was that she thought her appearance alone could mask her flaws. She dressed sharply, styled her hair perfectly, and even practiced her dismissive smirk in front of the mirror. Yet none of that could hide the truth. Her words betrayed her. Her superiority complex was evident in every syllable she spoke, dripping with disdain for anyone she viewed as beneath her, and in Karen's world, nearly everyone was beneath her. Her case was simple on the surface, a petty financial dispute blown wildly out of proportion. She claimed she was owed money for damages to a handbag she insisted was worth more than most people's rent. But the case was never really about the bag. It was about her ego. She wanted recognition, validation, and above all, a chance to belittle someone in a public setting where she thought the cameras would capture her triumph. She thought this was her moment to shine, but Karen had no idea who she was dealing with. Judge Judy wasn't just another authority figure she could sneer at. Judy had faced thousands of cases, dismantled liars with surgical precision, and exposed manipulative personalities for decades. She didn't just see what Karen was doing, she saw through it, all the way down to the insecure foundation Karen had been hiding behind arrogance for years. What made Karen so dangerous to herself was her inability to recognize the battlefield she had stepped onto. In her mind, she was about to educate Judy, to school a judge on how things really worked. She thought Judy's age made her outdated, irrelevant, and, in her exact words, useless. But arrogance has a way of writing its own downfall, and Karen was about to learn that lesson the hard way. What she didn't realize was that Judy wasn't just preparing to rule on her case. She was preparing to teach her a lesson that millions would never forget. From the very first question, Karen's contempt for the process was impossible to miss. Judge Judy asked her to clarify the details of her claim, and instead of answering directly, Karen let out a loud sigh, rolled her eyes dramatically, and muttered just loud enough for the microphones to catch, "This is ridiculous." The audience shifted in their seats. Some smirked at her boldness, while others shook their heads in disbelief. Everyone knew what was coming, even if Karen didn't. Karen leaned back in her chair as though she owned the room, crossing her arms and giving a look that screamed condescension. Each time Judge Judy spoke, Karen interrupted, cutting her off with phrases like, "Actually, if you knew anything about the law," and "That's not how it works, Grandma." The insult was whispered at first, but the venom behind it was unmistakable. Every dismissive laugh, every exaggerated shrug, every sarcastic smirk added fuel to the fire she was lighting under herself. The plaintiff on the other side could barely hide her disbelief. She had come prepared with documents and a calm demeanor, ready to state her case, but she watched as Karen turned the hearing into her own stage for mockery. The plaintiff didn't need to say much. Karen's arrogance was doing all the work for her. The cameras caught every moment, preserving it for the millions who would later watch in stunned silence. Judge Judy, however, remained calm. She had built a career on never reacting impulsively and on letting arrogance hang itself with its own rope. But the more Karen smirked, the more the courtroom felt like a coiled spring. Judy's silence wasn't weakness. It was calculation. She let Karen laugh. She let her interrupt. She let her lean forward and call her outdated and irrelevant. And finally came those fatal words, "You're just a useless grandma in a robe." The moment the words left Karen's lips, the air shifted. The audience gasped audibly as if someone had thrown a brick through stained glass. The plaintiff's jaw dropped, her pen clattering onto the desk. Even the bailiff, who had heard every insult imaginable, stiffened and turned his eyes directly toward Karen, bracing for impact. For a moment, time froze. Karen, oblivious to the severity of what she had just done, smiled smugly and adjusted her jacket as if she had just won some invisible game. In her mind, she had scored the ultimate point. She believed that by undermining Judy's authority, she had shifted the power dynamic in her favor. But she couldn't have been more wrong. What Karen didn't realize was that Judge Judy had been preparing her counterstrike since the very first disrespectful sigh. Every insult, every eye roll, every interruption had been carefully catalogued. The trap was set. Judy didn't need to shout or scold. What she was about to deliver wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a takedown so precise and devastating that it would strip Karen of her arrogance piece by piece. The silence after Karen's insult stretched longer than anyone expected. Seconds felt like minutes. The weight of the moment pressed down on everyone until it was clear that the storm was about to break. Karen had no idea she had just crossed a line from which there was no return. The silence in the courtroom was suffocating, broken only by the faint hum of the cameras capturing every second. Judge Judy sat motionless, her eyes locked on Karen with a stare so piercing it felt like it could cut through steel. She didn't raise her voice or slam her gavel. She didn't need to. The stillness itself was more powerful than any outburst could ever be. And in that silence, Judy was building her response. Karen, still oblivious to the shifting atmosphere, tapped her manicured nails on the desk, smirking at what she thought was a victorious insult. She believed she had reduced Judy to speechlessness. To her, this was proof she had won. But to everyone else, it was painfully clear that Karen had just signed her own humiliation warrant. Then Judy leaned forward slowly, deliberately. Her voice came out low and precise, each word chosen with the care of a surgeon preparing for an incision. "Let's take a closer look at your case, shall we?" she said, her tone deceptively calm. Karen's smile faltered slightly. This wasn't the fiery retaliation she expected. This was something colder, sharper. Piece by piece, Judy began dismantling Karen's so-called evidence. The receipts Karen had waved around proudly were outdated and irrelevant. The photographs she claimed proved her story were grainy, unconvincing, and contradicted by her own timeline. The expert advice she quoted turned out to be nothing more than blog posts pulled from questionable corners of the internet. With each revelation, Judy didn't just poke holes in Karen's story. She shredded it entirely until it resembled nothing more than confetti scattered on the courtroom floor. Karen shifted uncomfortably, her earlier bravado cracking as she tried to interject. But Judy raised a single finger, silencing her instantly. "You've spoken enough, Ms. Mitchell," she said. Her eyes narrowed. "Now it's my turn." The authority in her voice carried such weight that even Karen's arrogance couldn't push against it. For the first time that day, Karen sat back, suddenly aware that the ground beneath her was collapsing. Judy paused, letting the tension build again, letting the audience hang on her every word. Then she delivered the line that froze the entire room. "You call me a useless grandma. Let me remind you, I've forgotten more about the law than you'll ever learn in your entire lifetime." The words landed like a gavel strike. The audience gasped, the plaintiff's lips curled into a quiet smile, and even the bailiff allowed the faintest flicker of approval to cross his usually stoic face. Karen's smirk vanished completely, replaced by a twitch of panic she couldn't quite hide. Judy wasn't finished. She continued her dismantling with calm ferocity, stacking Karen's lies and arrogance into a mountain so high it crushed her own credibility. And as she spoke, it became clear Judy hadn't just been waiting to respond. She had been setting the trap all along. Karen thought she was running the show, but Judy had been in control from the very first moment. The time had come. Karen's smugness crumbled, replaced with nervous fidgeting that betrayed the storm unraveling inside her. She had expected Judge Judy to explode in anger, to yell or shout. Instead, Judy had chosen a different weapon: precision. And now it was time for the finishing blow. Judy leaned forward, her gaze unflinching. "Yes, I am a grandmother," she began, her voice steady, almost deceptively gentle. "And that means I've lived long enough to see more liars, cheats, and fools than you could possibly imagine. Every time I sit in this chair, I meet another one. And today, Ms. Mitchell, you volunteered to be an example." The words hit Karen harder than any shouted insult ever could. Her face flushed crimson, her jaw quivered, and her eyes darted desperately toward the audience, searching for support. But there was none. Every pair of eyes in that courtroom was locked on Judy, captivated by the authority radiating from her words. Judy's tone sharpened. "You call me a useless grandma. Let me educate you. I've presided over more than 20,000 cases. I've shaped rulings that law students still study. I've stood face to face with criminals, con artists, and manipulators who thought they were untouchable. And not a single one of them walked out of here thinking they were bigger than the law. Do you really think you, with your attitude and your handbag claims, are going to be the first?" The audience erupted in murmurs. The plaintiff's eyes gleamed with vindication. Even the bailiff, ever composed, allowed himself the faintest nod of agreement. Karen's bravado was gone, replaced by trembling hands clutching the desk in front of her. She had come in swinging, but now she was pinned against the ropes with no escape. Judy pressed harder, every sentence tightening the noose around Karen's arrogance. "Respect is not optional in my courtroom. It's not something you can sneer at, roll your eyes over, or dismiss as unimportant. Respect is the foundation of justice. And today, you've shown this court and the world that you have none." Karen's lips trembled as though she wanted to argue, but no words came. Her voice, once so loud and mocking, had abandoned her completely. The audience leaned in closer, knowing they were witnessing history. The kind of moment that would be clipped, shared, and replayed millions of times. Then came the final strike, the comeback that would etch itself into television legend. "The difference between you and me, Ms. Mitchell, is simple. You think my age makes me useless. I know your arrogance makes you powerless. And when arrogance and wisdom collide, arrogance always loses." The silence that followed was deafening. Not because the audience was unsure how to react, but because they were stunned into stillness. It was the kind of silence that only comes when a single sentence demolishes an entire persona. Karen sat frozen, her face pale, her eyes glassy. She had walked in thinking she could humiliate Judge Judy, but instead, she had been reduced to nothing more than a cautionary tale. The plaintiff allowed herself a small, satisfied smile, while the stenographer shook her head in disbelief, her fingers barely keeping up with Judy's relentless pace. Karen shifted again in her seat, but there was no recovery. She was finished, and everyone in that courtroom knew it. Judge Judy sat back in her chair, the faintest trace of a victorious smile flickering across her face. She didn't need to gloat. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her words had done the work. Karen had tried to belittle her, but in doing so, she had set herself up for the kind of public destruction that would haunt her forever. The courtroom, still heavy with silence after Judy's brutal comeback, turned its collective gaze back to Karen. The woman who had strutted in with the confidence of a queen was now unraveling before everyone's eyes. Her cheeks flushed, her lips quivered, and her hands, once so expressive in their dismissive waves, now trembled against the desk. The smirk she had clung to like armor was gone, melted into a mask of panic. Karen tried to speak, but her voice cracked, thin and desperate. "Your Honor, I didn't mean it like that. I was just passionate," she stammered, each word landing flat, devoid of the sharp edge she had wielded earlier. The courtroom wasn't buying it, and neither was Judy. "Passion?" Judy's voice sliced through the air like a knife. "You confuse passion with arrogance. You confuse respect with weakness. And now you want to rewrite history in the middle of my courtroom." Judy leaned forward, her eyes burning with authority. "No, Ms. Mitchell, the record is clear. You called me useless. You mocked this court, and now you'll live with the consequences." Karen's eyes filled with tears. They started as small glimmers, but within seconds they were streaming down her face, smearing her makeup into dark streaks. The audience shifted again, some watching in stunned silence, others whispering to each other about the historic humiliation they were witnessing. The plaintiff, who had endured Karen's arrogance for months, sat straighter in her chair, her confidence restored by the sight of justice unfolding. "I didn't mean it," Karen whispered again, her voice nearly drowned out by her own sobs. She looked around the room for sympathy, but there was none. Even her friend, who had come to support her, kept her eyes glued to her phone, desperate to disassociate from the disaster unraveling before her. The bailiff inched closer, not because Karen was dangerous, but because her sobbing had grown so intense that she seemed close to collapsing under the weight of her humiliation. Judy, unmoved, delivered the final sting. "Respect isn't something you discover when it's convenient. Respect is the bare minimum this court requires, and today, you proved you don't even have that." The sobs grew louder, Karen's shoulders shaking as the reality of her situation came crashing down. She wasn't just losing a case or facing financial penalties. She was losing the image she had carefully crafted for herself. The superiority, the untouchable confidence, the illusion of power. All of it shattered in front of millions of viewers who would never forget her face or her words. For once, the cameras weren't her allies. They weren't capturing her victory speech or smug smiles. They were capturing her downfall frame by frame, turning her arrogance into the stuff of viral legend. The same audience she had dismissed was now witnessing her total collapse, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Karen had wanted the spotlight. She had it now, but not in the way she ever imagined. Instead of glory, the light revealed her for what she was: entitled, arrogant, and powerless against the authority she had tried so hard to mock. The gavel came down with a sharp crack, sealing Karen's fate. Judge Judy's ruling was swift and merciless. Not only did Karen lose her case, but she was also ordered to cover additional court costs as a consequence of her disrespect. The plaintiff exhaled in relief, tears welling up not from humiliation like Karen's, but from vindication. For her, justice had finally spoken loud and clear. Karen, meanwhile, was left trembling in her seat, her sobs echoing through the room as the bailiff signaled for her to be escorted out. Her once perfect appearance had been reduced to a spectacle. Mascara streaks down her cheeks, lipstick smeared, her carefully styled hair undone by nervous hands. She had walked into the courtroom expecting to play the conqueror, but she was leaving as the conquered, forever marked by the words she had thrown at the wrong person. The audience filed out slowly, whispering in disbelief. Some shook their heads at her arrogance, others chuckled quietly at her downfall, and many would later recount the moment as the most shocking clapback they had ever seen on television. Even those who had attended countless tapings knew this one was special. It wasn't just a ruling, it was a reckoning. By the time the episode aired, the clip had already begun circulating online, spreading like wildfire across social media. Headlines blared, "Woman calls Judge Judy useless grandma, instantly regrets it." Memes flooded the internet, and comments poured in from viewers around the world. "This is why you don't mess with Judge Judy," one post read. "Age isn't weakness, it's wisdom," said another. Karen had dreamed of being remembered, but not like this. Instead of a victory, she had become a cautionary tale. Judge Judy, sitting at her bench, delivered the closing words with the same unflinching authority she had displayed throughout. Arrogance may shout loudly, but respect always speaks louder. The words lingered in the air long after the cameras stopped rolling. And so, the story ended not with Karen's triumph, but with her humiliation serving as a reminder to millions. In Judy's courtroom, arrogance is stripped bare, Lies are dismantled, and respect is non-negotiable. Arrogance may dazzle for a moment, but respect endures. When pride collides with wisdom, pride always shatters. And as Karen learned too late, you never call Judge Judy useless, because she'll show you, in front of the world, just how powerful wisdom truly is. The courtroom cameras captured the exact moment when Brandon Matthews made the biggest mistake of his privileged life. There he sat, slouched in the defendant's chair, like he was waiting for a latte at Starbucks, his $200 phone casually placed. On the table in front of him, his designer sneakers probably worth more than the elderly man's entire monthly Social Security check. His face carried that unmistakable smirk of someone who had never, not even once in his 18 years, faced real consequences for anything. He had no idea that in less than 9 minutes, that same phone, those same texts, he thought were private jokes between friends, would become the nuclear weapon Judge Judy would use to utterly destroy every shred of his arrogance on national television. What makes this story absolutely insane isn't just that Brandon lost his case, or that he got humiliated in front of millions. What Judge Judy did to this spoiled rich kid was so brutally precise, so devastatingly thorough, it became the most viral courtroom moment of the year. This was a teenager who walked into that courtroom actually planning to mock an elderly accident victim on TV, for content, for laughs, for his pathetic social media following. He had posted about it, bragged about it, told his friends it would be easy money and easy publicity. Brandon Matthews thought he was about to become internet famous for schooling America's toughest judge. Instead, he became the poster child for why you should never underestimate someone who has spent 25 years holding people like him accountable. Picture this scene. Brandon Matthews, 18 years old, trust fund kid from Westchester County, strutting into Judge Judy's courtroom wearing a Supreme hoodie that cost $800 and limited edition Jordans he probably paid someone else to wait in line for. His confidence wasn't just high, it was stratospheric. He had spent 3 weeks preparing what he thought was an airtight case, Googling legal terms, watching YouTube videos about how to win in court, practicing his victim's face in the mirror. He looked at Judge Judy like she was just another adult who would eventually cave to his lawyer father's pressure and his family's money. He had no idea he was walking into a trap that had been carefully set the moment his case file landed on Judge Judy's desk. The case seemed simple enough. Just another fender bender. Another insurance dispute. Brandon had crashed his BMW into an elderly man's parked Honda. Then, in the twisted logic only extreme privilege can produce, he was suing the victim. This teenager had totaled a 73-year-old retired postal worker's only car, fled the scene without leaving any information, and had the audacity to take that same man to court, claiming emotional distress. What Brandon had forgotten, or perhaps never considered, was that Judge Judy's research team had already obtained his phone records. Every text message, Instagram story, TikTok video, every piece of digital evidence proving he wasn't just wrong. He was a liar and a fraud, someone who thought mocking elderly people was entertainment. Robert Chen, the plaintiff, sat clutching a worn folder full of repair estimates and medical bills. At 73, he had spent his entire life following rules, respecting authority, and taking care of his family. His 15-year-old Honda wasn't much, but it was paid off, maintained meticulously, and it was their lifeline. His wife was undergoing chemotherapy, and that car got her to appointments, picked up medications, and preserved some independence in their retirement years. When Brandon's BMW slammed into it at nearly 60 mph in a 25 mph zone, it wasn't just property damage. It was the destruction of their mobility, independence, and peace of mind. And now, Robert had to sit across from the kid who did this and listen to him claim he was the victim. Brandon thought this would be easy. He had told his friends, posted on social media, even made TikToks about the upcoming court appearance. In his mind, this wasn't about justice. It was content. He had bragged that Judge Judy was just a TV personality, and that the worst that could happen was a small settlement his dad would pay. His lawyer father had convinced him that TV court shows were toothless, and real consequences didn't apply. Brandon believed every word, until he realized how disastrously wrong he had been. Judge Judy had seen thousands of cases in her legendary career. Within the first 30 seconds of reviewing Brandon's file, every alarm bell in her mind started ringing. His story wasn't just inconsistent, it was full of glaring contradictions. An 18-year-old claiming emotional distress from an accident he caused, conflicting insurance reports, security camera footage contradicting police reports, and then there were the social media posts he had hastily deleted but forgotten that the internet never forgets. Judge Judy's team had screenshots of everything, meticulously building a timeline to dismantle every claim Brandon planned to make. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Cameras rolled, the audience settled, expecting another routine case. Brandon strutted through the doors like he was walking into his high school cafeteria, where his family's money had always earned him respect he hadn't truly earned. His sneakers squeaked against the polished floor, his hoodie perfectly styled. He shot confident glances at the cameras, already imagining the clips he'd post later. Behind him, his parents tried to maintain dignity. His father, a corporate lawyer, shifted uncomfortably. His mother clutched her designer purse, avoiding eye contact. They had enabled this monster, funded his lifestyle, cleaned up his messes, and today they were about to see the consequences. Robert Chen sat quietly in the plaintiff section, looking small and fragile next to Brandon's obvious wealth. His suit was outdated, but clean. His hands trembled slightly as he organized paperwork. Photos of his destroyed Honda, medical appointment schedules for his wife, repair estimates. He looked like a man who had already accepted defeat, who had learned that people with money usually won regardless of who was right. Judge Judy entered with brisk efficiency. Everyone rose except Brandon, who made a small, disrespectful show of checking his phone before standing. Her eyes narrowed slightly, predatory assessment alerting those familiar with her courtroom that a storm was coming. She opened the case file, letting tension build while Brandon misread her silence as uncertainty. The opening statements began. Robert Chen spoke simply, honestly, without drama. He explained that he had been shopping for his wife's dietary needs during chemotherapy when he heard the crash. By the time he got outside, the BMW was speeding away. His beloved Honda, maintained for 15 years, was totaled. Without a car, getting his wife to treatments meant relying on neighbors, charity, the kindness of strangers. For a man who had spent his life self-sufficient, this dependence was almost as painful as the accident itself. Brandon barely looked at Robert during this testimony. Instead, he reviewed his notes, a prepared statement filled with legal terms he had copied from internet forums. When Judge Judy asked him to present his side, he stood with theatrical confidence, launching into what he clearly thought was a devastating counter-argument. He claimed that Robert's car had been parked illegally, jutting into the street and creating a hazard for drivers. He insisted the emotional trauma of the accident, the damage to his expensive BMW, and the stress of being falsely accused had caused him severe psychological distress. He threw around terms like contributory negligence and assumption of risk, with the overconfidence of someone who had spent maybe 20 minutes on a legal website. His voice carried that particular condescension that only someone who has never been challenged can muster. Judge Judy listened patiently, like a chess master watching an amateur make predictable moves. She let him talk, dig his hole deeper, and commit to his version of events with absolute certainty. Every few sentences, she asked clarifying questions that seemed innocent, but were actually laying the groundwork for what was coming. Where exactly were you driving from? What time did this happen? Did you stop to check on the other vehicle? Did you leave any information? Brandon answered with increasing confidence, clearly believing he was educating this television judge about the real world. His answers were smooth, practiced, and almost entirely fabricated. Then came the question that would begin Brandon's complete unraveling. Judge Judy leaned forward slightly, her expression shifting from neutral observation to something far more dangerous. "Mr. Matthews, do you frequently text while driving?" Brandon barely hesitated, shrugging casually. "Sometimes, Your Honor. I mean, everyone does it. It's not a big deal if you're careful." The courtroom hushed. Judge Judy's eyebrows rose slightly, the telltale signal that someone was about to have a very bad day. "And do you text about your accidents, Mr. Matthews? Do you share the details of your vehicular incidents with your friends?" Brandon's confident expression flickered. "I don't understand what you're asking, Your Honor. What does that have to do with anything?" Judge Judy reached down beside her bench and lifted a thick manila folder, the kind that suggested extensive documentation and research. Brandon's eyes followed the folder with the first hint of genuine concern crossing his previously smug features. "Mr. Matthews, when you filed this lawsuit, you opened yourself up to discovery. My team subpoenaed your phone records, your text messages, your social media posts, everything you thought was private, between you and your friends." The color began draining from Brandon's face as the implications sank in. He glanced at his parents, whose expressions had shifted from discomfort to horror. "Your Honor, that's an invasion of privacy. You can't just go through someone's personal phone." His voice pitched higher, losing confidence, sounding like a child whose toy had been taken away. Judge Judy's response was ice cold. "Mr. Matthews, you committed fraud, fled the scene of an accident, and then sued your victim. Your privacy concerns became irrelevant the moment you decided to lie under oath in my courtroom. And I'm about to show you, and everyone watching, exactly what kind of person you really are." She opened the folder deliberately. The audience leaned forward, sensing something explosive. Brandon's lawyer frantically flipped through his notes, unprepared for this turn of events. Robert Chen, who had looked defeated moments ago, raised his head with a glimmer of hope. Judge Judy pulled out the first printed text message for the courtroom to see. Sent from Brandon's phone at 3:47 p.m. on the day of the accident, 10 minutes before he crashed into Mr. Chen's vehicle, it read, "Gonna see how fast this BMW can go on Maple Street." Maple Street, Mr. Matthews. That's where you crashed into Mr. Chen's parked Honda at 58 mph in a 25 mph zone, Judge Judy said. Brandon's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "That was a joke, Your Honor. I wasn't serious. I was just messing around with my friend." His voice, once confident, now trembled with desperation. Judge Judy pulled out a second text message, sent 30 seconds after the accident. "LMO just smashed into some old dude's car. It's total haha." The courtroom gasped. Audience members who had been sitting quietly now showed visible anger and disgust. Robert Chen gripped the edge of his chair, tears welling up as he realized the casual cruelty with which this teenager had treated his livelihood. Brandon frantically shook his head. "That's out of context. I was in shock. People say stupid things when they're in shock." But even to his own ears, his excuses sounded hollow. The third text was worse, transforming the case from a simple accident into premeditated fraud. Judge Judy read it aloud. 2 minutes after the crash, while Mr. Chen was standing in the grocery store parking lot looking at his destroyed car, you didn't leave a note. Old man was still in the store. Low L, let his insurance deal with it. The audience reaction was immediate. Some shouted, some shook their heads. This wasn't negligence or carelessness anymore. This was deliberate, documented criminal behavior. Brandon's face went from pale to ashen. Confidence evaporated, replaced by the dawning realization he had permanently recorded his crimes. You fled the scene of an accident, Mr. Matthews. You laughed about destroying an elderly man's car. You deliberately avoided responsibility, and you documented it all in writing, Judge Judy said, each word a hammer blow. Then came the next revelation. A text sent the day after the crash to Brandon's father, the very lawyer who had raised him. Dad crashed the car. Old Honda looks cheap. Can you call insurance and say he hit me? He probably won't even fight it. The courtroom fell silent. This was premeditated fraud, implicating his father. Brandon's lawyer tried to object, but Judge Judy's single raised hand silenced him. Brandon shook his head frantically, voice rising to a shriek. I was panicking. I didn't know what to do. My dad didn't even respond. Judge Judy's reply was merciless. Actually, Mr. Matthews, your father did respond. He texted back, let me make some calls. And then, mysteriously, your insurance company filed a claim stating Mr. Chen's vehicle had backed into yours while you were legally parked. A claim security footage proves was fabricated. Brandon's father stood abruptly, face red, and walked out. His mother remained, crying silently, finally realizing the monster she had helped create. Judge Judy pulled out a fifth text, showing premeditation and mockery of the judicial system itself. The final piece of evidence was a group chat containing 5 of Brandon's friends. Judge Judy read it aloud exactly as written. Court with Judge Judy today. Going to make this old man look stupid on TV. Easy win. Easy money. Might go viral, LOL. The audience's reaction was explosive. Several people shouted in disapproval before the bailiff called for order. Brandon had entered the courtroom intending to humiliate Robert Chen on national television, turning an elderly man's suffering into entertainment, using Judge Judy's platform as a personal stage. The sheer callousness, the calculated cruelty, the complete lack of empathy. It painted a picture of someone who viewed others as props in his personal reality show. At this point, Brandon had completely broken down. His carefully styled hair was disheveled from running his shaking hands through it repeatedly, and his expensive designer clothes now looked like a costume that no longer fit the character he was trying to play. His voice came out in gasps as he offered one last desperate defense. Your Honor, please. Those texts, they don't mean anything. I was just talking trash with my friends. Everyone says stuff they don't mean. I'm only 18. I made mistakes. You can't use private conversations against me like this. Judge Judy's expression showed no sympathy, only the cold satisfaction of someone who had methodically built an airtight case and was now watching it crush exactly the person who deserved to be crushed. Mr. Matthews, these aren't just private conversations. These are confessions, evidence of fraud, conspiracy, hit and run, and a complete lack of human decency. You didn't make mistakes. You made choices. And now you're going to face the consequences of those choices. But she saved the most devastating piece of evidence for last. A text sent less than 24 hours before the courtroom showdown, addressed to his mother. Don't worry, Mom. I've got this. Judge is just a TV personality. She can't do anything real. Dad's lawyer said, worst case, we settle for like $2,000. That's nothing. Judge Judy looked directly at Brandon with an intensity that made him physically recoil. Would you like to revise your assessment of what I can do, Mr. Matthews? Because I'm about to show you exactly how real my authority is and how $2,000 compares to what you're about to pay. The devastation didn't stop with text messages. Judge Judy's team produced screenshots from Brandon's deleted social media posts. His Instagram story from the day of the accident, posted at 4:15 p.m. and deleted 3 hours later, showed a photo of his damaged BMW with the caption, "Crazy Day. Lol. A TikTok video posted the same evening, deleted the next morning, showed him dancing in front of the wrecked vehicle with the caption, "When you total someone's car, but you're rich, so it doesn't matter." Each piece of evidence was another nail in the coffin of Brandon's defense, a clear demonstration that this wasn't a mistake, but a mindset formed by entitlement and privilege. Brandon was openly weeping now, face buried in his hands, shoulders shaking. His sobs were as much the shock of facing real consequences as they were remorse, if remorse could even describe his reaction. His lawyer had given up, sitting silently, probably composing a resignation from Brandon's father's firm. Robert Chen, meanwhile, watched quietly, tears streaming down his face. But his were tears of relief and vindication after months of harassment and injustice. Judge Judy let the weight of the evidence settle over the courtroom before delivering her ruling, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had presided over 20,000 cases. "Mr. Matthews, in 25 years of jurisprudence, I've seen liars, cheats, and criminals of every variety walk through my courtroom. But you represent something particularly toxic. You represent what happens when privilege meets cruelty, when enablement meets entitlement, when parents choose comfort over character. You didn't just commit a crime, you celebrated it, documented it, and planned to profit from it. Worst of all, you felt no remorse for the pain you caused an innocent elderly man." Her words landed like a sledgehammer. The financial judgment was severe. $15,000 to Robert Chen, covering the full replacement value of his destroyed car. 3 months of alternative transportation, missed medical appointments for his wife, and punitive damages for emotional distress. Brandon's face went even paler. Not the $2,000 his father promised, but real consequences, hitting his privileged life directly. Judge Judy added that these funds must be paid within 30 days, with collection proceedings, including potential garnishment of his trust fund, if he failed to comply. But the consequences didn't end there. Judge Judy's expression hardened as she continued. "I am forwarding all text messages, social media posts, and evidence of conspiracy to the district attorney's office. You have confessed in writing to multiple crimes, including hit and run, insurance fraud, filing a false police report, and conspiracy to commit fraud. These are criminal charges that carry potential jail time, probation, and a permanent record." Brandon's lawyer tried one last intervention, trembling. "Your Honor, my client is only 18 years old. Surely we can consider that." Judge Judy cut him off sharply. "Counselor, your client is old enough to drive at deadly speeds, commit premeditated fraud, and mock an elderly cancer patient. He's old enough to face adult consequences." Turning to Robert Chen, she added with compassion, "Mr. Chen, I apologize on behalf of a justice system that allowed this to go on so long. Your dignity has been remarkable. You came here asking only for what was fair, and instead you faced harassment. I hope this judgment restores your faith that accountability still exists." The audience erupted into applause, and Judge Judy's gavel brought the courtroom to order. Judgment for the plaintiff, $15,000. Case dismissed. The aftermath was brutal. Within hours, clips of the case went viral across Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and Reddit. Hashtags like Justice Served and Judge Judy Wins trended immediately. Brandon's social media presence, once a source of pride, vanished overnight, though the internet had already archived every post, every screenshot. Legal consequences followed swiftly. Within 72 hours, the district attorney filed criminal charges: insurance fraud, a felony carrying up to 5 years in prison, hit and run, a misdemeanor with mandatory license suspension, filing a false police report, another misdemeanor. Brandon now faced financial penalties, jail time, probation, community service, and a permanent criminal record. His father, implicated by his own text messages, faced investigation by the State Bar Association and potential disbarment proceedings.